All right, this will be the chapter summary for Chapter 7 in the Consumer Behavior course. This will be the last external influencer that the authors look at, that we'll be looking at in this course. There are many other external influencers. These are just the ones that are included in the model for this course and that we have time to cover in the course. So this will finish up the material for exam number 1, which covers the introductory chapter, Chapter 1, and then the chapters 2 through 7 dealing with the external influencers, and we're finishing up with group influences. Now there are lots of groups that we belong to, that we don't belong to, that influence our buying behavior. It's kind of a generic term when we say group influence, but we intend for it to be that way. That's intentional because there are groups that we belong to, our church, our fraternity, sorority. There are groups that we belong to that influence our buying behavior. You belong to the group of a college student. So there are certain things from that group, other college students, influence your buying behavior. Then there are groups that we don't belong to that influence our buying behavior. For example, you have a 15-year-old male and he wants to buy some new tennis shoes. And his favorite basketball team is the Atlanta Hawks professional basketball team. So he looks to see what shoe contracts they have to determine what basketball shoes he's going to buy. He's not a member of that professional basketball team, that group, but yet that group does have influence on him. So we don't have to be members of a group for a group to influence our buying behavior. There is an introductory of different types of introduction there in Roman numeral 1 of the outline, the different types of groups and, groups that we want to associate with, groups that we don't want to associate with, disassociative groups. But they do mention a group called a reference group. A reference group is simply a group that we go to when we want to buy something. It could be a group we're a member of or not, but when we look to make a purchase decision, we will refer to a group to help us with that decision, that purchase. And we call that group that the customer goes to a reference group. And so as marketing managers, we want to know what groups do consumers go to when buying our product, as far as getting information. There is different types of influences that this reference group will have on the customer or potential customer, and that's Roman numeral 2. Sometimes the group has what we call informational influence, where basically the customer is going to the reference group just for information. Where can I buy it? What does it do for me? These sorts of things. How much does it cost? How does it work? It's basic information, just facts. And it's information that we get, excuse me, as far as the purchase is concerned. Sometimes we go to the group for identification influence, meaning we go to the reference group to get identification information, meaning we want to identify with the group. So we buy things that help us to be identified with that group. For example, if you want to be identified as a wealthy person, you may see it as, I'll look at wealthy groups that have wealthy people in it, see what kind of cars they drive, clothes they wear, and if I drive those cars, wear those clothes, I'll be identified as a wealthy person. So sometimes we go to groups for identification, identification, meaning the influence that reference group has on us is through wanting to be identified with it. And then the last one is normative influence, and this is the same word, uses the same root word that's in normal. We go to a group, or the group influences us on what is normal behavior, what would be a normal purchase, what is a normal product that we should have. We want to appear normal. We want to appear to fit in and that sort of thing. Not necessarily identify or get information, but just to work through society and appear to be normal. That would be normative influence. A very important exhibit in this chapter is found on page 228. It's a 2x2 matrix. It's called a table, but it's a 2x2 matrix, and it looks at it's table 7.2. It looks at the influences that groups have on us whether it is a visible or private purchase, and whether it's a necessity or a non-necessity, like a luxury item. If we create a 2x2 matrix, and these being the axes, the private versus public purchase, and a necessity versus a luxury, when we create that, we can see that sometimes the group will have a very powerful brand influence. We got to get a certain brand. Then sometimes it might be dependent, the group influence might be more on the product itself. For example, if we're looking at a public non-necessity, meaning we're buying something that the public's going to know what brand we bought, and they're going to know whether we bought that product or not. It's, and it's something we don't really need. Then the product itself and the brand is going to be pretty strong influences by the group. The group's going to influence us a great deal on that. So take a look at that table. I think it's pretty interesting and illustrates how strong group influences can be. The last part here, as we move through Chapter 7, looks at how marketing managers might use groups. As far as getting a strategy together, how does a group communicate, who are the individuals within the group, that sort of thing. They mentioned one individual on page 231, someone called an opinion leader. An opinion leader is a member of a group that has information about a specific product or product category. It's kind of like if you if you have questions about buying a new car and you want to talk to someone who knows about a car, and you think the first person that comes to mind is a mechanic, a friend of yours, you go to church with them, it's a family friend, and they're a mechanic, and you're like, if I ever have car questions, I go to them, then that mechanic would be an opinion leader, and there would be an opinion leader for the automotive product category. Opinion leaders typically are opinion leaders for one product category. They know all about it. They buy the product. They get information about the product. They know when new ones are being launched, etc. New technologies related to this product. So opinion leaders are very important for marketing managers to know who they are, how they influence the groups, etc. Now, there's another person in the groups, kind of like an opinion leader, but they have a little bit different role, and that would be someone called a market maven. A market maven is a lot like an opinion leader, but a market maven knows about a lot of product categories. This is someone who knows a little bit about everything, not a lot about one thing. That's an opinion leader. A little bit about everything is a market maven. This would be, another name for this might be a Renaissance man, if you've ever heard about that. Someone who is knowledgeable and skilled in several different things. And so we call them market mavens. They are good for getting common information out about common products, etc. We can use market mavens that know a little bit about everything. We can use them in multiple product categories, etc. As marketing managers. And then the last thing in the chapter will be how do we get new products out to these groups, the best way to move it through the group. And it's called, this section is referred to as the diffusion of innovation. Sounds complicated, but diffusion simply means spreading, and innovation, a new product or a new technology. So the spreading of a new product through the groups. How does that work? It really depends on several factors, the group itself as well as the product. If the product is something brand new, that is not going to, if the innovation is something that's going to require major changes, it's going to take a while, major changes on the consumer's part, it's going to take quite a while for that product to move through the group, as opposed to something that doesn't require much change at all. That's pretty straightforward. We know how it works. Your textbook does give some names for these. A continuous innovation would be one that doesn't require much change. It's something very simple. It'd be like a new flavor of chewing gum. I know what chewing gum is. It's just a new flavor of it. That's not going to take long for that product to spread through the market or spread through a group. One that will take the longest will be something that's a discontinuous innovation, something that's brand new that we don't have an understanding of, that is something that I'm trying to think of. Let's see, I wrote like segways. That is something that, has taken a long time to move through the population, move through the market, because this is something that's new to the world. Yes, it is transportation, but it is a new kind of transportation, operated totally differently, doesn't fit the way we think. And so this would be considered a discontinuous innovation, and it's going to take much longer to move through the market. In between those two is a dynamically continuous innovation, which it does require some changes, but I do know, kind of like a cell phone. I know how phones work, but how cell phones work is a little bit different. So when cell phones were first being developed, it was kind of a discontinuous. It was just a different way of thinking about phones. So that's how we look at how fast something is diffused through the groups or the marketplace. And we do give nicknames to the group members based on when they buy the product. And this is on page 246. Gives a little table and charts, a little graph there that shows the nicknames. We have, the folks based on when they buy it. The first ones to purchase a product, we call them innovators. They buy it maybe in a test market or before anybody else even knows about it. Then we have the early adopters. Those are probably the opinion leaders. Maybe the innovators and early adopters are the opinion leaders. Then we have the early majority, then the late majority, and then the last ones to buy an innovation in the market would be considered laggards. Laggards are those that are the last ones to buy or never buy. It's kind of like, your grandparents who still don't have a microwave oven, and so the family buys them one and puts it in there, and your grandfather says, well, you can put it there, but I'm not going to use that thing. Those are laggards, the ones that are the last ones to buy. So we kind of give nicknames based on how the product, nicknames to the group members based on how the product moves through the marketplace and through the group, how it's diffused. That's pretty much chapter 7 in some of the terminology and concepts there. This concludes the information for exam number 1, the external influencers.